This story begins on Lily's first day on the job. She got a job as a maid, and today is her first day at her new job. First of all, she was given a little tour and told the nature of the job. She still can't believe she's going to be working in that mansion. It's the greatest mansion in the whole kingdom, owned by the Duke. The remuneration that associates receive here is unmatched by any other place. Accordingly, by working continuously, Lily will be able to fulfill her dream of returning home with her sister and opening a flower store together. Meanwhile, the maid who had been asked to tell Lily her duties asked her to come over and look at something with her. She said that what the girl saw in front of her was the North Woods, and the building behind the trees is a place she must memorize and is forbidden to go near. No matter what happens or whoever says what, she has to remember that. The assistant warned that if Lily didn't want to lose her job and planned to make a lot of money, she would have to follow this rule. But for some reason, it was never explained to her what this was about or the reason for the rule. In any case, Lily tried not to think about it, but just a few minutes later, her coworkers started this conversation themselves. They started asking if she had been in that building and if she knew who lived there. In this way, she began gradually to learn more specific information and realized it's about the ghost of Frigel, the nickname given to the Duke's youngest son who lives there alone. There were rumors of how disfigured his face was and how cruel he could be. Some assured that he was insane, and others that it was best not to mess with them. Accordingly, after such information and banning, everyone wants to see it and make sure that it is really true. But at the same time, no one wants to risk a job and a very good reward for their labor. Lily is sure she'll never have the urge to go there and see if that ghost is there. But for the moment, she has no idea that soon she'll have to make the choice she's been warned about. That same day, in the evening, a woman comes to her and asks her to take a package to Frigel. At first glance, it looks very much like some kind of test, because she was asked to do it by a woman who asked one of the assistants to tell her about the rules. It's very strange that, for sure, she could be the one who made that rule, and now she's suggesting that Lily break it. The woman explained her request by saying that she wanted to ask the other girl, but she was not at her workplace at the moment. And then she forbade Lily to give the package to the other girls, which also sounds too suspicious. The woman left her alone and said she was looking forward to her help. So, despite a colleague's warning, she agreed to do it and went into the woods. With each step, she begins to question her decision more and more. It got so dark and frightening that it made me want to go back. Lily began to reassure herself that either way, someone would notice her absence and would probably start looking for her. And also that it's a very quick assignment and you can just put this package by the door and sneak back in unnoticed. Surprisingly, the girl took a chance and walked right in. As it turns out, it's bright and cozy enough. It's hard to tell that some crazy ghost actually lives here. Lily decided to go straight to the second floor, for surely he was right there in his room. It was as if the girl sensed exactly where she was and, not afraid, knocked on the door to ask permission to enter. And in response, she heard only one word, "Come in." The girl started into his room with the utmost caution and immediately apologized for coming unannounced. She became so curious that Lily couldn't help herself and began to consider his appearance. As it turns out, this guy looks nothing like she imagined him to look from her coworkers' accounts. She remembered at once their words, which characterized him as the kind of who is dangerous to approach or even get in front of. In fact, this man is the exact opposite of what they say he is. The guy's name is Michael. He welcomed the guest, and so far he's making a very good impression. After a while, Lily noticed the floor and decided to wonder what it was, to which the guy replied that it's a puzzle called White Knight. All the pieces in it are white, and it took him 2 whole days to put it together. He reads that there's a beauty and aesthetics to it. But even at that moment, the girl kept thinking about what the catch might be. Because if everyone's saying bad things about him, surely they can't be making it up, and there must be some explanation. It remains to be seen how he could have created such a perception of himself. At some point, Lily suddenly realized and assumed why he was called a ghost. There can only be one explanation. It has to do with his appearance, which is out of this world. Meanwhile, Michael remembered a package that must contain some kind of book. He took her, and after that, the girl tried to hint that if that was the end of it, it was time for her to go. And just as the guy started unpacking his package, she happened to see, and it seems like She recognized it. It's a very popular book that was hard not to recognize. Lily could barely contain her surprise and admiration, for she hadn't thought it would be her after all. Michael noticed it right away and asked if the girl could really read. She found the question odd and a little hurtful. The thing is, her little sister liked it when she read her some of the books the bookstore threw away. And as a result, so she learned to read before she went to school. Michael was very surprised and said it was impressive, and she must be very proud of her parents. At this point, Lily stopped making eye contact with him and made it clear that she didn't want to bring it up again. The guy immediately realized what she meant and regretted reminding her about her parents. He immediately apologized and said it wasn't on purpose because he didn't know about it, to which Lily replied that it was fine and he shouldn't apologize to her. After that, they got back on the subject of reading, and apparently they have a lot to talk about. Michael realized that she liked to read, so he decided to give her a small gift. He offered to pick out any books for her and asked her to take it as an apology. That was very unexpected and equally nice. I just have to figure out what to say to that. Without thinking long, the girl thanked him for such a gift and addressed him as her lord. The guy clearly didn't expect to hear her say something like that. And at that moment, he didn't realize what it meant and how to react to it, because that phrase she said sounded too ambiguous. Afterward, she said she was sure each of these books was too expensive, and she wasn't sure whether she had the right to agree to accept such a gift. Michael pretended that he simply hadn't heard the words, for he had no intention of taking no for an answer. If he decided to give her such a gift, in his opinion, it should not be discussed, much less questioned. And yet, when she repeated her phrase again, the lad had already thought of something to answer it. He explained that he had read them all a long time ago, and they just stood there as decorations. Besides, he didn't plan on rereading them again, to which the girl replied that it was very nice, but with all due respect, she had to decline. Lily didn't even have time to finish her sentence before he walked up to her, looked her straight in the eye, and told her not to worry about anything. Apparently, he really doesn't intend to hear her say no, so he's just going to stand his ground. At some point, she didn't notice at all how they started standing too close to each other, and in order to ignore her attention at that point, the guy decided to ask her what her name was. Lily introduced herself, but at the same time began to grow increasingly anxious, for there was no telling what could be expected next. Meanwhile, evening had come, and in order that Lily might get back to the mansion in time, they had to say goodbye to the. Lastly, he warned her that he would be very glad if she came to visit him again. Thus, the girl was convinced that she should not have feared him and believed the dubious rumor. Instead of a violent and crazy ghost, she met a really nice guy. She is still surprised that he turned out to be so handsome and elegant. He's got a very kind nature, and it seems like it wasn't the last time they met. They were evidently interested in each other, and perhaps, though they tried to hide it, there was a look of that it's very much like love at first sight, as evidenced by her smile and pensive look after meeting me. Michael wasn't that shy, and wasn't even afraid to hint that he'd like to see her again. Left alone, he had a lot of thoughts and reasoning about it. It was so serious that Michael destroyed his puzzle. He spent hours taking it apart one piece at a time. And as a result, he realized he couldn't go on like this and had to make a final decision. But to do that, you have to make a very difficult choice. He's either hated, or they're afraid and cautious about walking past his house, for fear of seeing him through the window, or looking down on him and seeing no danger in him. It becomes very difficult to understand his train of thought and what it all means, because they are too scattered, like puzzles. It turns out that after meeting Lily, he had a desire to change his life and make it a point to see her as often as possible. It's still hard for him to forget her eyes and her smile, and just for that, he'll do anything he can. He found it so unbearable to say goodbye to her that it's impossible to put it into words. Immersed in these thoughts, he could think of nothing else. The boy still in this room, and didn't even notice that it was deep night and hours had passed, when all of a sudden, a deputy came to see if everything was all right, because he had seen someone leaving the house. The guy said it was okay. It was the girl who brought his package. Michael told him that she was the first person who had ever managed to hold his gaze, looking him in the eye, which means she's special and different from everyone else who's been asked to come to him before. Apparently, the guy trusts him enough to tell him what he's going through and what he thinks of her. Afterward, Michael turned to him and said they had something to do. Unsurprisingly, if it had something to do with Lily. Very interesting what he's up to, because maybe in the process, it will reveal who he really is and what he's capable of. The aide didn't even listen to the end of it, and as usual, knew at once what was required of him. As it turns out, Michael plans to move her into this house and make it so he can see her every day. But does that mean she's going to be his personal assistant and change jobs in the near future? The next day, Lily had just woken up and was immediately informed that Michael wanted to make her his assistant. She didn't even know how to react to that. After all, she didn't know the man well enough yet to agree to stay in the same house with him. According to the woman who got her the job, the girl has no right to refuse if she tries to do so. She will regret it very much. At that moment, the only thing she wanted at that moment was to know whether it was worth agreeing to. For although it was a pleasant meeting, it did not mean that you can relax and not have to worry about security and everything else. As usual, before she is faced with her new responsibilities, her coworker has to tell her everything. One would hope that Michael's intentions are good. He didn't intend anything bad. And he really is, as she recognized him yesterday. After that, it's time to familiarize yourself with your responsibilities and understand what the job entails. According to the woman she just talked to, it won't be anything difficult there and might even be easier than here. Unfortunately, Lily didn't even have time to think things through and figure out what she was willing to do and what she wasn't. She's just faced with the fact that she can't refuse or even think about ignoring someone's orders. At that moment, she decided to take the last opportunity of hinting that I'd like to stay here as long as possible if possible. Her coworker immediately realized that apparently Lily was talking to Michael, so she was asking for help. The girl at once decided to seize the opportunity and began to inquire as to his appearance and character, to which Lily replied that he was not at all what they say he is and genuinely understood why he was considered dangerous and violent. It turns out it's his in-laws and they hate Michael, and everyone knows it. These people are the Duchess and the Marquis, but of the two of them, it is the Marquis who hates him most. It started when Michael first showed up at the palace. The Duchess practically kicked him out to live in Frigel. She didn't care that she was doing it to a defenseless child. In parallel, the Marquis also couldn't rest until he'd abused the child. Accordingly, it is not at all surprising that after these conditions and the attitude of his relatives, many are convinced that he may have become insane and plans to take revenge for it. It's not often you see a noble family taking in an illegitimate child, and it's one of the most prestigious in the entire country. As we know, the Marquis is set to arrive next month, which means total insanity is about to ensue. Lastly, the girl warned that she shouldn't get too close to the guy, much less fall in love with him. Her coworker is sure that anyone who contacts him is going to meet a sad end anyway, and it's inevitable. You can imagine how the girl feels at this point. After all these warnings, she must be having a hard time. After that, she received further advice to always go through that entrance, for it is quite hidden. Just as Lily was about to say goodbye, she received some sort of gift in a small box. The girl said thank you for that and asked not to worry about her, because she was sure everything would be fine. When suddenly, they heard someone's voice, and it was another assistant trying to catch up with them. Turns out she just doesn't know that Lily's going to be working for Michael yet, which is why she was so freaked out when she saw them outside his house. Sometime later, the conversation revealed that the Marquis was on his way and would arrive any minute now. No wonder there isn't a single person who doesn't get nervous or anxious when they hear the news. Marquis Maximilian, he comes very rarely and every time something crazy happens, so it's unknown what we can expect from him this time. But he's not going alone. There's a girl with him who forbids him to drink any liquids. She warns him that if he takes another sip, she's going to throw the bottle out the door and he's going to regret it. It's Lady Carla. But it seems like the guy will purposely ignore her request and purposely do things to make her nervous and even more resentful. He continued to do what she tried to forbid him to do, and I wonder how the girl will react to that. And as soon as she said one word, he didn't even listen to her, but instead took the book from her and looked her in the eyes. He just threw the book out the window without even thinking about how valuable it was to the girl. Now I see why everyone thinks he's so crazy. The lady couldn't take it anymore and started telling him everything she thought about him, and after that, asked him to stop the map immediately. At this point, he turned to her and asked her to read what this document said. It seems to be one of the reasons why he's acting so crazy. He asked her to look at what Michael had managed to do while they'd been away. But was it really that serious? Meanwhile, hearing the sounds of the approaching carriage, Lily becomes more and more nervous, because she realizes that she will have to attend and meet the Marquis in any case. She's having a hard time staying calm because she has no idea how the day is going to end. At that moment, a colleague decided to help her. She asked her to go to Michael, and it wasn't just advice. The girl knew what she was talking about. Because once the Marquis arrives, it'll be hard for Lily to get in and impossible for her new master to get out. The girl thanked her for her help, though in truth, she had originally thought that no one would want to do it and no one would be interested in it. Anyway, she has no other choice. The girl is at work and understands and should understand that she should listen only to her master, and not think about what the consequences might be or who would be his guests, because it's none of her business yet. And the only people who should be thinking about it are Michael and those who are going to visit him. They've just arrived and eagerly started looking for the guy. The first thing they met was his aide. The Marquis did not even greet him and began to treat him as if the aide was guilty of something or owed him something. Although he's not really, he's just doing his job and was in the wrong place at the wrong time. He's just unlucky. Meanwhile, Lily has managed to hide not far behind a tree, and with complete incomprehension, observes what is happening. She is outraged by the behavior of the Marquis. It turns out that it wasn't the assistant. Lily just couldn't see his face and didn't see that it was Michael. As it turned out, the Marquis was so angry that the boy had dared to enroll in the same school as him. He began to resent him as if he had no right to do so and should have clarified this point with him. The girl can't believe her eyes, because unlike that Marquis, Michael is actually the kindest, nicest guy she knows. She hoped very much that Michael would say something back to him and not allow anyone to treat him like that. It is very interesting how this conflict will end and whether they will be able to find some kind of compromise, which is still very unlikely to happen. When suddenly Michael looked in her direction, and he seemed to notice her for sure and couldn't mistake her for anyone else. Lily, of course, hid right away, but that didn't mean she managed to do it in time. It was already too late and pointless. Meanwhile, when the Marquis began to discourage the boy and ask him not to dishonor the family, Michael knew at once what to say to him. The guy hinted slightly that since it was about shame, Marquis, with his grades, had done it a long time ago and had handled it before Michael had. Apparently, he's not trying to give up. And this time I don't intend to forgive him for such behavior. Besides, no one has the right to tell him what school to choose, and even less to allow it or not. He began to remind him of his shortcomings, which made Maximilian stop and start to get very nervous, for he didn't know what to say to that anymore. The only thing left for him to do in this situation is to solve it by force. He's used to solving conflicts that way, but this time, he won't succeed. Michael did tell him about the fact that, in fact, the Marquis could be calm and not worry about it after all. The guy obviously didn't expect to hear something like that. He even stopped to listen to what Michael wanted to tell him. As suddenly, Michael purposely decided to wait a little while for him to get nervous and begged him to tell him why he shouldn't be nervous. After a few minutes, he did tell him that, in fact, he had not been warned that the Duke had applied on his behalf, which means the guy didn't want to go to that school, and especially would never have done it if he knew they were going to go there together. Michael explained that he planned to stay at the outhouse forever, which meant that they would see each other very rarely. Maximilian was so overjoyed and relieved that he couldn't even contain his emotions. He was genuinely happy to hear such wonderful news. Afterward, as usual, without saying goodbye, he went to the carriage and did not say a word to him. Meanwhile, Lily looks at him and imagines how hard it must be to have relatives who think only of themselves. As suddenly, Michael stealthily approached her. He asked if she was prone to sneaking and hiding to eavesdrop on other people's conversations, to which the girl replied that he just misunderstood everything, and from the outside, it looks completely different than it really is. But unfortunately, she was so nervous and didn't want to look bad that she got confused and couldn't explain anything. Instead, she started asking him a lot of questions regarding their relationship with the Marquis, because apparently there was a problem with it. This conversation looks like the girl is just trying to talk about any topic except the one that makes her uncomfortable. Luckily, the guy reacted quite calmly and didn't even think about accusing her of anything bad. At some point, he did back her up and continued to talk about the subject and even told her that things would be much calmer if the Marcus stayed in his dorm room. Every time school ends, they really get into something crazy. Maximilian starts coming over more and more often and hugs him about absolutely everything, when suddenly he continued to tell her something, and at that moment helped her out of the bushes so that they were too close to each other again. The guy didn't stop and continued to remind her that in the future, she knew she shouldn't run into Maximilian. It turns out, in this way, he's trying to keep her away from the nasty habits of that madman, especially when it comes to girls. As soon as she heard about something like this, she immediately had a lot of questions. She never thought it was actually true, because he's a ducal heir, and they don't usually have bad habits, much less disrespect girls like Michael says they do. To which the guy replied that there's really nothing wrong with being a nobleman. They're just people like everyone else. After these words, Lily was again convinced that if people were confronted with the character of the Marquis, they would never allow themselves to say that Michael was as crazy as he was. It really has nothing to do with reality. And because of the non-true rumors, many people are convinced it's true. Meanwhile, in the Imperial Palace, there's an ongoing debate about the education of boys and which school to choose for it. The Duchess is adamantly opposed to sending Michael to a school that is for nobles. In her opinion, it is unacceptable. She's trying to convince everyone that before it's too late, they need to change that decision and make the right choice so that they don't regret it. At this point, Maximilian decided to calm his mom down and make her happy by tearing up the application and throwing it in Michael's face. Upon learning of his son's action, the man stopped and immediately made it clear by his reaction that he was clearly unhappy. The Duke asked how his son dared to meddle in his father's affairs and yet, without even warning him, did it his way. In response, the guy explained, he only did it because his father continues to violate the title order, not thinking of how it seemed to his son. To which the Duke replied that since he had begun to talk about it, he would do well to remember his grades. They were already enough to ruin the reputation not only of his own, but of the family as well. So they stopped hiding their real opinions and started talking about what didn't suit them. Surprisingly, Maximilian was not afraid to yell at his father and begin to resent the fact that Michael wanted to be sent to a school as good as his. He's always trying to make sure he gets the best, and Michael is content with what's left. But apparently, the Duke realizes that's very unfair and has decided to fix it. As a result, the boy couldn't stand it, and before he left for his room, he warned his father that Michael had personally told him that he had no intention of enrolling there. It was a very difficult and loud conversation, and as usual, the Marquis managed to spoil the Duke's mood. And it happens absolutely every time they get together for dinner and try to discuss some important business. Anyway, it's becoming clear that the Duchess is on Maximilian's side and the Duke is for Michael. At least he's trying to restore justice. After dinner, the Duchess asked her daughter to go and find out where her brother had gone, for at this rate, no one would appear at breakfast tomorrow. To which the girl replied that, in her opinion, it would be absolutely pointless because everyone knows perfectly well what kind of character he has, and approaching him after such conflicts is the worst thing you can do, and much better to just leave him alone. The Duchess went away on her own business and left the girl alone, and so passed their dinner. Meanwhile, in the aides' room, the aides are actively discussing this dinner, and specifically what their conflict is about. They discuss what the ducal family talked about every time, but this time, it's especially interesting. They think everything is too unfair and they shouldn't have to suffer because of a crazy ghost. Thus, just by being around, Lily witnessed this conversation. Periodically, she felt very strongly about telling them that, in fact, they were accusing the wrong person. Because if they'd had one conversation with Michael or found out what kind of character the Marquis had, they'd have changed their minds forever. Did not regret thinking so badly of him, for unlike the Marquis, Michael is much kinder and better than him. Sometime later, the deputies again witnessed them begin to argue amongst themselves, but the girl tried to ignore it, since unlike the others, she realizes that it's none of her business, and she has nothing to do with it. And as soon as she had a free minute and Lily could rest, a coworker came up to her and asked for help. She explained that they were running out of time, and to avoid getting penalized, they had to ask someone to help. It turns out that apparently Lady Carla is on vacation and wants to stay longer, but she came back so quickly that her maids were left there. The Duchess keeps changing the league schedule based on Marquis Maximilian's plans. The lady is the only one who can calm him down when he's angry. Meanwhile, they were already approaching her room, and the girl warned that they should be as careful as possible not to spoil her mood even further. They knocked gently on the door and informed her that they had come to help her change her clothes. If that was necessary, of course. The lady at once allowed them to enter, and from her look it was very evident that she was already tired of the constant conflicts between the brothers. She is constantly suffering because of it, and has to comfort one of them instead of resting or minding her own business. And surprisingly, despite her constant problems, she tries not to show it, and looks pretty good. Though really, she'd already forgotten what it was to rest and stop worrying about other people's problems. After a few minutes, the lady happened to notice that she had a new assistant. She even complimented her on her looks. But what's more unexpected, at that moment, another assistant came up and asked how the lady could think her colleague was a pretty girl, to which Lady Carla replied that she does read it that way and sees nothing wrong with it. She is genuinely very pleased to see such beautiful girls among her assistants, and not the opposite. Lily was a little embarrassed, and didn't even know how to react to that, because normally, it wasn't common to talk about how someone could be prettier than someone in the royal family. In the lady's opinion, there's only one problem with this, and that's her brother. He might not be able to resist such beauty, so Lily better watch out for him. After a while, the helpers finally got free and had some free time. Sometime before going to bed, a girl is approached by her coworker and seems to want to talk about something. Actually, she just wanted to ask how Lily was doing, to which the girl replied that she was a little surprised, because before, she had always been convinced that there was no conflict in the royal families, and that they were all very calm. A coworker explained that it's all about multiple issues and everyone's opinions are very different from each other. And of course, because they have absolutely everything, they're used to it and want more. There's nothing wrong with that, but unfortunately, they've stopped appreciating what they have and, most importantly, each other. Thus, they are used to quarreling, and more often than not, they forget how unpleasant it is for someone to hear abusive words from someone in the family. They talked about it some more and decided there was no point in worrying about it, because it was none of their business. After talking about wealth and endless amounts of everything needed for a comfortable life, the girl remembered what she was here for. And, of course, about her own sister who needs her help and has no one else to help her. The girl's younger sister, Lauren, had suffered from a severe illness since she was a child. She was constantly choking and had problems with her medication. It was very difficult to buy something nice, and after the death of her parents, it fell to her older sister to take care of her. She did her best to earn good money, but it still wasn't enough. It was crucial, because without it, she could have died. Lily would never forgive herself if she didn't try to earn money to save her sister and do what her parents usually did for her. The girl was always at work and hardly ever at home. She just didn't have time for it. And even when she was there, due to lack of energy and rest, she just went to bed. As time went on, Lauren felt worse and worse. Doctors refused to help them and kept warning that very soon the baby might not survive and would die. And when she thought of that, she would blame herself and cry a lot. Because if something like that happened and she lost her sister, she wouldn't be able to take it. So she kept working hard and always believed that someday they wouldn't have money problems, and most importantly, health problems, which is why she has to survive any way she can in this place and make enough money. Lily will have to get over the breakup between the Duke and Duchess, Lady Carla, and the intimidating Marquis, though it won't be easy. We'll have to deal with it. Either way, she's willing to go to any lengths to keep her sister alive and not lose her as a parent. Since then, it's been 2 months. And since then, a lot of interesting things have happened. Lily didn't forget to write letters to her sister, and she did it absolutely every day to make sure she was okay. and know absolutely everything that's going on with her, and how she's feeling, and of course, whether the medications she's taking are helping. The girl worries about it a lot and periodically checks to see if Lauren is remembering to take her meds, because if she misses even one appointment, it will have a noticeable effect on her well-being, and all the treatment they've had so far will be pointless. Meanwhile, a few days had passed since she had sent her another letter, and the girl received a reply from her. She was tipped off by a coworker and cheered with the news that Lauren had sent a return email. Lily's reaction at this point was incredible as usual. She gets excited about it every time, as if it's the first time she's done it. But this time, the letter was different from what it usually looked like. Lauren informed her that in the near future, she was planning on coming to visit her. But to do that, she needs to find out the address where her sister works. And together with her teacher, she'll go on that journey. That's all very well. But the only problem is that if Lauren's on the road for any length of time, she could get a flare-up. And usually, it appears at the moment, when the cold weather starts and the first snow appears. So this trip will have to be planned as carefully as possible. As suddenly, during the discussion, the girls heard a rather unpleasant and alarming sound of a. They did not at first understand what it meant, nor did they see anything suspicious. But at some point, they were seriously frightened because we don't know what it could be and whether the security guards are in control of the situation. Because the first thing they thought at that moment was that there was an intruder on the property. But as it turned out, everything was under control. The sound came from the Marquis, who remembered his hobby and decided to have some fun. At this point, a coworker suggested that they shouldn't be distracted by something. They had nothing to do because they already had a lot of work to do. To which Lily replied that it was very difficult for her to work among people who thought Marquis was better than Michael. She tried to explain that they're all wrong about this, and at some point, they'll see for themselves. And at that moment, before they could talk about it, another coworker came in and asked Lily to go with her. The girl said goodbye and said she wouldn't mind continuing this conversation a little later on, as long as she's not the only one interested in it, and she doesn't mind talking about it. Apparently, someone is once again failing to handle a lot of work, and maybe they want to ask Lily to do it again. It turns out their mission is to secretly move Michael into the main building, because where he lives now, some kind of trap or something like that is planned. At least for the moment, it's only a rumor. But not to take any chances, the deputies decided to take care and save the guy in advance. I really wonder if this is true, and if she's really going to have to clean the room where Michael is going to live now. Meanwhile, the girl knocked on some door and really hoped the person in the room was in a good mood right now. And at that moment, she happened to remember that she hadn't seen Michael in a while and wouldn't mind seeing him again. As it turned out that he was the one in the room she had come to clean, the girl greeted him with a, and it seems the decision to enter this room without hearing permission and thinking no one was here was a mistake. When the girl heard no response from him, she looked closely at him and realized he was just sleeping. She felt bad, because if he woke up because of some noise, it wouldn't be very nice. In any case, she moved closer to him to be sure whether he had noticed her or not. Lily felt awkward again, because in such a situation, it was very difficult to know what was better to do, just leave or stay and continue cleaning. And it was at that moment, without even opening his eyes, that he said hello to her and told her she wasn't bothering him. After that, he suggested we just ignore him and mind our own business. And to see if she was comfortable with that option, Michael asked if he could stay here, and explained that he'd be interested in observing it, as strange as that sounds from his side. In that case, since he had asked for it, the girl had no choice but to agree to work in his presence after all. As a result, she handled it so well that Michael couldn't help but say that the room was incredibly pleasant to be in, and she handled it very well, to which the girl replied that she was very pleased, but it was just her job and she couldn't do it any other way, much less in his presence, realizing that he would be watching her every action and judging her efforts. All she has to do is bring everything to perfection, though really, even without that, it's too perfect and impossible to even pick on anything. But Michael has no idea what hard work it is and no idea how much you want to relax and be alone afterwards. At this moment, they had an unexpected conversation about the Duchess, it turns out, when she's in a bad mood. It was always reflected in her attitude towards her assistants, And when they didn't do something perfectly, she would shout at them and even hit them sometimes. So when Michael saw how well the girl was doing her job, he wondered if the Duchess could find something to pick on in it. And after that, he asked about her parents, to which the girl replied that they were long gone. They had died many years ago, and she had only a sister left. At the moment of this conversation, the girl faltered visibly, for she began to remember the fine times when they were alive. It pains her to think back to the last time she saw them, and to realize that she can't get them back. She even turned away from him to hide her tears and not to show her emotions, because remembering it was really very difficult indeed. For a moment she wondered if she should have told you about it at all, because maybe it was unnecessary. Sensing her doubt and awkwardness, he stepped closer and said that when she brought it up again, he would be happy to be there to support her through a difficult moment, which means he cares about her problems and feelings when she's sad. He realizes how difficult this has been in her life, so he genuinely wants to help her through it. After these words, Lily was insanely grateful to him, because apart from him, there was not a single person who sincerely wanted to support her. The girl was really relieved, because thanks to this conversation, she realized that she had someone to discuss her problems with. Accordingly, observing it from the outside, one can conclude that sooner or later, their communication will develop into something more. Because if they already trust each other and aren't afraid to talk about personal things, it means something. If they didn't have a liking for each other, they would never talk about it or feel as comfortable as they do with anyone else. This is confirmed by their looks, feelings that increase with each meeting, and the unfamiliar sensations that come with being close to each other. Lily tries not to pay attention to him, and because of that, she doesn't notice at all the stingray way Michael is looking at her. He takes this opportunity and admires it in this moment, as if he's trying to tell someone or confess something. After some more time, the girl has finished cleaning and is ready to show the final result. And afterwards, wished him a good day and told him it was time for her to leave, as there was quite a bit of work left to do. To which the guy replied, anything would be fine if she stayed a few minutes longer. It turned out he wanted to ask about the book he'd given her some time ago, because in the meantime, she might have had time to read it and tell him what she thought of it. But it seems, due to a lack of free time, she never read any of them, so it's very difficult for her to answer that question and admit that she never even touched it. She tried to make some excuse, but from her reaction and the fact that it was hard for her to look him in the eye at that moment, it was clear to him at once. He just went over to her and tried to calm her down as usual. Michael said he understood and that she didn't have time for this, and she shouldn't feel guilty about it. And even on the contrary, he praised her, for she did not read books instead of work, and planned to start them only in her spare time. So they had to say goodbye, and as soon as the girl left his room, she immediately stopped and began to get very nervous, because he constantly had to calm her down. She had too many thoughts at that moment. Lily thought that the guy might be offended by her, or think that she didn't need those books at all. She began to blame herself very much for the situation, for she thought she should have silently cleaned his room, as she was supposed to do, when suddenly she was accidentally spotted by one of her co-workers, and of course, she couldn't pass by, seeing her crying outside the room of a man who everyone thinks is a crazy ghost. The girl had so many thoughts at that moment, and the first thing she thought was that he had offended her somehow, and it was no wonder that if Lily said that wasn't true, no one would believe her. A co-worker asked her what was wrong, and at that moment, she was sure it was because of him. For example, he might have said something unpleasant to her, or complained about her work. In this case, in order to avoid talking about this topic, and the girl did not cry again, the colleague decided to switch jobs and offered to clean this corridor instead of her. Lily answered her and told her that she just got it all wrong. The girl wasn't offended or anything like that. On the contrary, she was the one who was a bit to blame for the situation, but it seems she's not planning to tell her the details. She just made it clear that she wanted to be alone and didn't need anyone's support, because it was her own fault, though she barely holds back her tears so that no one will think it's because of Michael, because after this, he'll be even more feared. After that, her colleague asked her to calm down and promised that if they could get back to the room unnoticed, she would listen to her and help her in any way she could. She began to look around carefully, because if anyone saw them, they were likely to have a lot more work to do. The colleague cautiously peeked out from behind the wall to make sure there was no one here. She informed Lily that it was safe here and they could go to their rooms without any problems, so she could fear nothing. The girl just ignores her coworker, and she hasn't said a word to her since she's been thinking about Michael. In the meantime, they had gotten to their room and finally had a chance to talk about it. Lily had of course told them whose room she was in, but as usual, it didn't sound like it was the same as it really was. Her interlocutor remains convinced that Michael is a dangerous man, and Lily is wrongly trying to make excuses for the madman. After a while, she decided to tell him that originally, another maid had been supposed to come to him, but as usual, Lily had been sent to see him. The girl asked to keep this information secret and asked to believe that she really wasn't offended by anyone, because it was about something else entirely. To which the colleague replied that the girl could be sure of it, and she wouldn't tell anyone anything, because she realized how important it was. And after that, she first hinted to her that if she had the urge, they could be friends. Lily smiled back, not letting on that it was a pretty good idea. After all, they were not bad at communicating and trusted each other relatively well. One can only hope that the coworker doesn't have bad intentions and genuinely wants to be friends with her to share secrets and discuss something interesting after work. Afterward, the girls began to talk about the footsteps they had heard, which are often heard at night, and they have two persons in suspicion, Lady Carla and the Duchess of the. Because they were the only ones who could make sounds like heeled footsteps, we can only hope it wasn't the Duchess, because if she finds out that the girls decided to rest during working hours, there could be big trouble. So, it's best to be as quiet as possible, so no one suddenly walks into the room and tells her that someone has allowed themselves to rest ahead of time. The next day, they came up with a plan whereby Eden was to keep an eye on everything in the hallway while Lily cleaned Michael's room. And they still didn't get to hear the very footsteps that sounded like the ones they heard at night. And they stopped thinking about it for a while. And then one day, she started being assigned chores. It was always on days when she didn't have to clean his room. Yesterday, it was a fresh ream of paper. Today, it's a bottle of ink. Lily really wished he would just ask for everything he needed right away, and she wouldn't have to check in on him too often. But it seems like it's on purpose, just to see each other as much as possible and have an excuse to do it. This time, he's in a special mood. And before greeting each other, Michael said that he missed him a lot. But the girl tried to ignore it and started talking to him like she'd forgotten all about the last time she'd seen him, because she didn't want to discuss it again. This time, he has prepared for this meeting, and it turns out that he wants to give her a book again, as he remembers that the girl is very fond of adventure stories. She clearly hadn't expected him to give her such a gift, especially after she hadn't yet started on the past. But is it really the same book she brought him in a parcel the very first time she brought it to him? The girl is still surprised that after many awkward situations, he continues to treat her better and better. She isn't scared to go into his room at all anymore. Lily is sure that in any situation, even when she is guilty of something, Michael will calm her down and everything will be fine. How suddenly a girl just happens to meet his sister on the way, and it seems she can't just walk past her. As soon as she approached her, Lady Carla reminded her that she had asked her to stay away from her brothers, and all for her safety. At this point, Lily was scared again, because she didn't know if she should explain anything to her, because she didn't know if it would make it better or worse. Seeing the maid's excitement, the lady explained that she had come here quite by accident, for she had to wait for another maid to bring her clothes. She started telling her some information that was completely uninteresting to Lily. The girl just silently started listening to it and pretending like it was interesting. At the right moments, she tried to compliment her and keep this conversation going, just to keep it from getting back to the subject of her brothers. We can only hope that she only stopped her assistant because she was too bored to wait for someone and not to punish her for anything. The only thing that might help her at this point is if clothes are finally brought for the lady and she goes about her business. And yet it was not without innuendo, as far as the brothers were concerned. Carla warned that if the Duchess found out about it, she would not react as calmly as Lady Carla did. The lady warned me that this was the last warning, and next time, they'll handle it differently. To which the girl replied that she would try to correct herself and would not allow something like this to happen again, although in fact, it is very hard to believe in it. At the very least, Michael will still do everything he can to see Lily as often as possible, and he's not interested in how his sister or the Duchess feels about it. It is very interesting how the girl will act in this situation, because she has a very difficult choice, on which may depend her future. She probably made a choice a long time ago about who she would listen to, and whose opinion she would prioritize. In this situation, she simply told the lady what she wanted her to say, for if any conflict started, the Duchess and the Marquis might join in, which was even worse. Either way, her decision will only depend on how she feels, and if she feels anything at all for Michael. Because if it's true and she does have feelings for him, she won't even think about listening to Carla, who will forbid it and make sure nothing happens between them. After this conversation, the lady went about her business, confident that she had succeeded in changing the girl's mind and that she would never again associate with her brother. But only Lily knows if that's true. It's up to her to decide if she's willing to sacrifice her relationship with Michael just to obey her superiors. The girl stayed on the street, decided to get some fresh air and think everything over well, because maybe she really let the relationship with Michael, although so far they both hide their opinion on this matter. It would be very good if the girl told him about this conversation, for that would be the way to get his opinion on it. She'd know right away if he had any thoughts on their relationship, and if she should expect anything at all. Thus she found herself in a most difficult situation, for if, all this time, she mistakenly sensed from him some initiative, the girl might risk her job if she did not listen to the ladies. Meanwhile, a bird flew into his room. He was playing chess and was very surprised to see it, for he had forgotten that his window was open. As soon as he saw it on the table, he had an instantaneous reaction, for before he had just been thinking and feeling sad about something. As it turns out, this happens a lot. Michael loves animals, especially small birds, so they can make him feel better. He can stare at her for a long time and marvel at how beautiful this creature is. And as soon as he thinks of something nice or sees something beautiful, he thinks of Lily, which confirms that he does have feelings. So it's obvious what choice she has to make after all, except that if she only knew what he thinks of her, she'd make it a lot sooner. The guy remembers every word she said to him from the very first day they met. He will never forget her smile and the feeling he gets from being around her. Amazingly, just the appearance of a small bird in his room, even that reminds him of her and evokes incredibly pleasant emotions. I wonder when he'll admit it to her, because sooner or later he won't be able to hide it, and he'll have to make the first step. When suddenly his father came to him unannounced, and if he did, the conversation and the reason for it must be serious. The guy asked how he was feeling and what he could do to help him, to which the man replied that lately he had too much of a headache and didn't have time to discuss recent events. And after that, he offered him a game of chess to relax a little and not think about problems. Michael did not refuse and gladly supported this proposal. Plus, they both really loved the game and could play it all day long. If there was nothing to do, that's all they'd do. As soon as they finished the first round, the guy offered to start again, as he hadn't had a worthy opponent in a long time. But surprisingly, the man refused to play a second time. He got up from his chair and said that was enough for today. It was very unexpected on his part. Michael was absolutely sure that his father would not refuse, because he himself had offered to play chess, and usually it was a game that lasted several rounds. It is customary to play a few times so that the first attempts are as practice. He explained his decision by the fact that it was too late, and if anyone saw what the Duke was doing, it could be the occasion for another rumor that he was doing nothing. It's certainly a justifiable reason, but it's very clear from Michael's reaction that he's clearly upset and would like to play a little bit more. In any case, he's used to this kind of attitude on his part, and sudden changes in mood. This man is rarely happy about anything. In his entire life, he doesn't remember a time when he wondered how the child was doing or if he had any problems. But at the same time, the boy always knew that this is how his difficult life made him. His father fought all the time and because of that, he became so rough and stopped showing real emotions. He does not blame his father, but like all children, he always wanted to hear nice words from him or feel that he could turn to him for help as his father. And that's not the main problem he's had since he was a child. He was an unwanted and illegitimate child. For that very reason, he was always treated worse than his brother. Now I see why the Duchess was against the boys being in the same school and on the same level. Every time he remembers the reason for his difficult childhood, he becomes very painful and unpleasant, because the child is not to blame for how and at what time he came into the world. And because of that, he had to suffer all the time and feel superfluous in this family. The Duchess didn't even hide how she felt about him, and purposely made the child feel superfluous. These thoughts, as usual, give him a very bad headache, and, most unpleasantly, he can't even turn to someone for help. And even if he does, they will just ignore him and pretend that they don't have time for it, and because of the amount of work they have to do, they just can't come to his aid. Not surprisingly, as a result of this unfair treatment by his family, he became very secretive and stopped trusting everyone around him. Almost every night, he falls asleep with tears in his eyes, because when he is alone, it becomes too unbearable to hold back his emotions. He has these memories too often, and mostly when he's alone in his room. Meanwhile, Lily is at work as usual, and trying to be as productive as possible, so she doesn't get complained about or anything like that. She tries to do everything she is asked to do as well as possible in order to earn good treatment, and not be one of those who can be fired for any mistakes. And as you know, this happens very often. For reasons she knows, she can never allow something like this to happen, so she has to be one of the best and never deny anyone anything. When her new friends suddenly came up to her, and luckily Lily managed to hold on to the dishes, because at that moment, they could have just broken. Turns out she just wanted to share the good news with her, which was that they were having an incredibly delicious crab dinner tonight. But in response, Lily didn't react in any way, to which her friend asked if she'd never tried it before. And afterward, she asked her to look to one side to see with her own eyes how beautiful and appetizing the dish looked. They looked that way at the same time, and judging by the look on her friend's face, she was looking forward to tasting and savoring that flavor already. At that moment, Lily was very surprised at this reaction, because she didn't think her friend could be so excited about a delicious dinner. The girl, of course, realizes that this is good news, but at the same time, she is genuinely surprised by her friend's impatience. She seems to like seafood a lot, even too much. Looking at this crab, instead of admiration, she thought only of one thing. How could it be eaten? For at first sight it seemed to her that it could not excite any appetite. And as soon as it was the right moment to taste it already, her colleagues gladly did so, and began to enjoy the exquisite flavor. Watching, it's not surprising that she, too, had the urge to taste the dish. She took a small piece, but since she had never eaten such a meal before, she started to repeat after her colleagues, and it turned out to be not difficult at all and very tasty. The girl liked it so much that as soon as the next day came, she decided to share it with Michael. She told him everything about how it was, and even that it was now her favorite dish that just didn't compare to anything else she'd tried before. Judging by the guy's reaction, he obviously didn't expect something like this from her, because before, she was very shy and afraid to say something to him first. And now, she's even telling him how much she enjoyed last night's dinner and what she thinks about it. It turns out that a long time ago, when her mom was still alive, the girl was treated to crab. But that time, it was nothing like the one she had tasted last night. They used to be sure that nothing like it existed in the world anymore. But as it turned out, that crab from yesterday was much better than the one she had tasted before. Michael smiled slightly as he listened to the whole story about this seafood, for he had never thought they would talk about it before. She had so much emotion that she didn't even let him say anything and kept talking about how wonderful it was. And afterward she decided to inquire, for surely, since they had been given the opportunity to dine on such crab, something good or grand must have happened. It turns out that ever since the lady made her debut, everyone has been in a hurry to give her their gifts. Some foods that spoil quickly go straight to the dining room. Accordingly, one of them could have been that crab. And so it went to the maids as dinner. And it turns out that the kind of delicacy that girls admire is the least of what was in those gifts. And besides, his sister doesn't really like anything like that. After that, Lily felt like asking if he liked that and if he'd ever tasted crab. But in response, he just shook his head, meaning he had no idea what it tasted like. She began to tell him that if he did try the dish, he would be as delighted as all the maids who had tasted it last night. She tried to explain to him that if that happened, he would demand this dish for breakfast, lunch, and dinner all the time, and she had no doubt about that. She suddenly remembered the conversation with his sister, and her mood immediately worsened, because sooner or later, she might find out again that the girl came to his brother, and they talked about something that did not concern the work. She began to think about whether it would be right of her to tell the guy about the meeting, because there was no telling how he might react and whether he would take it up with Lady Carla. And if he did, she would treat her badly and find out that the girl had told him about everything. Even though they had talked to her calmly that time, it didn't mean she'd stay that way forever, especially since the lady had warned her that next time they wouldn't be so calm. The guy saw Lily's anxiety and decided to ask what made her nervous again, because just a few minutes ago, she was in a great mood and was telling him about the crabs. He's still amazed at how quickly her mood changes, and that it very often depends on minor moments that one might not even pay attention to. Only he knows nothing about Lily talking to his sister. It's very interesting to see his reaction when he finds out that she asked Lily to stop talking to him and warned him that if the girl ignored that request, she would regret it very much.